The gunshot echoed across the dusty main street of Genoa, Nevada, silencing the usual afternoon bustle as Harriet Lane stood defiantly in front of the town hall, her impassioned words cut short by Sheriff Dawson's warning shot. The year was 1876, and in this small corner of the West, a woman's opinion was considered about as valuable as fool's gold, especially when it challenged the powers that be. "That's enough out of you, Miss Lane," Sheriff Dawson growled, holstering his smoking pistol and advancing toward her. His weathered face contorted with anger beneath the brim of his hat. "Stirring up trouble about the mining company's water rights is against the public good. You're under arrest for inciting disorder." Harriet's green eyes flashed with indignation as she stood her ground, her auburn hair whipping in the Nevada breeze. At 26, she had long since stopped caring what the men of Genoa thought a proper lady should do. The public good. "Is that what you call letting Whitcomb's company drain our creek dry while farmers lose their livelihoods?" The crowd that had gathered for her impromptu speech shifted nervously. Some nodded in agreement, but most averted their eyes, unwilling to cross the sheriff or the powerful mining interests he protected. "I said that's enough," Dawson snarled, reaching for his handcuffs. "You'll have plenty of time to consider your reckless words in a cell." "You'll have to arrest me too, then." The deep voice cut through the tension like a knife. The crowd parted as Zachary Irwin stepped forward, the tall cowboy's spurs jingling with each deliberate step. His presence commanded attention not because of any ostentatious display, but rather the quiet confidence with which he moved. "This doesn't concern you, Irwin," Dawson warned, his hand drifting toward his holster again. "I believe it does," Zach replied evenly, coming to stand beside Harriet. "Miss Lane is only saying what half the town is thinking. The creek belongs to everyone, not just Whitcomb and his silver mine." Harriet glanced at him in surprise. She knew Zachary Irwin by reputation, a skilled horse trainer who kept mostly to himself at his small ranch outside town, but they had exchanged no more than pleasantries on the occasions they'd crossed paths. Now here he was, risking arrest to defend her. Sheriff Dawson's face reddened. "You're making a mistake, Irwin. Don't throw in your lot with this troublemaker." "The only mistake here is thinking you can silence the truth," Zach replied, his voice remaining steady despite the clear challenge in his words. "If speaking out against injustice is a crime in Genoa, then you'd better bring more handcuffs." A murmur rippled through the onlookers. Dawson's eyes darted around, suddenly aware that the situation was slipping from his control. One arrest was simple enough, but two especially when one was Irwin, who had friends among the ranchers and merchants that would cause talk. Talk that might reach the territorial governor's ears. "This isn't over," the sheriff finally spat, jabbing a finger toward Harriet. "Consider yourself warned, Miss Lane. Next time, there won't be any cowboys riding to your rescue." With that, he turned and stomped toward his office, the crowd slowly dispersing in his wake. Harriet released a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. "Thank you, Mr. Irwin," she said, turning to face her unexpected defender. "Though I fear you've made an enemy today." Zach's weathered face softened slightly, the hint of a smile touching the corners of his mouth. "Sheriff Dawson and I have never seen eye to eye, Miss Lane. And I meant what I said. You're only speaking the truth about Whitcomb's operation. Still, it was brave of you to step in." She studied him more carefully now, the sun-bronzed skin, the intelligent blue eyes beneath the brim of his hat, the way he carried himself with a dignity that had nothing to do with pride. "Not bravery," he corrected her gently. "Just couldn't stand by watching a lady being mistreated for speaking her mind." He glanced around at the now empty street. "Though perhaps the town square isn't the safest place for you right now, may I escort you home?" Harriet hesitated. Her father, the town's aging doctor, would likely be worried sick if news of her confrontation with the sheriff reached him. "I would appreciate that, Mr. Irwin." "Zach," he offered as they began walking. "Mr. Irwin was my father." "Harriet," she replied with a small smile. "Though most people in town have taken to calling me that troublemaking Lane girl these days." The corner of his mouth quirked up. "I've always thought trouble had its merits, especially when it's for the right reasons." As they walked down the street toward the modest house where Harriet lived with her father, she became acutely aware of the curious glances from shopkeepers and passers-by. Being seen with Zachary Irwin would only add fuel to the town's gossip fire, but at that moment she couldn't bring herself to care. "Have you lived in Genoa long?" she asked, realizing she knew little about him beyond his reputation. "5 years now," he replied. "Came west after the war, worked cattle drives for a spell, then saved enough to buy my little piece of land." He glanced at her. "What about you? I know you're Dr. Lane's daughter, but there's clearly more to your story than that." Harriet's smile turned wistful. "Born and raised here. My mother died when I was 12. After that, it was just father and me. He sent me to school in San Francisco for a few years, thought a proper education would make me a proper lady." She laughed softly. "I'm afraid I returned with more ideas than propriety." "The West needs ideas," Zach said thoughtfully, "and people brave enough to speak them." They reached the white picket fence surrounding the Lane residence, and Harriet paused at the gate. "Would you like to come in? Father would want to thank you properly." Zach shook his head. "Another time, perhaps. I should get back to the ranch. Horses don't feed themselves." He tipped his hat. "Miss Lane, Harriet, be careful. Whitcomb has more friends than just the sheriff in this town." "I know," she replied, her expression turning serious, "but someone has to stand up to them." "Indeed." His blue eyes held hers for a moment longer than necessary. "Good day to you." As Harriet watched him walk away, she couldn't shake the feeling that something significant had just happened, something beyond a simple rescue from the sheriff's heavy hand. She had no way of knowing that Zachary Irwin's intervention that day would change both their lives irrevocably. The next morning, Harriet woke to the sound of someone pounding on the front door. She hastily pulled on a robe and hurried downstairs, where her father, Dr. Edward Lane, was already opening the door to reveal a breathless young boy. "Doc, you're needed at the Irwin place right away," the boy exclaimed. "Mr. Irwin's been hurt bad." Harriet's heart seized. "Zachary, what happened to him?" The boy, she recognized him now as Tommy Wilson from the general store, looked at her with wide eyes. "Some men jumped him last night when he was coming back from the saloon. Beat him something awful. His ranch hand found him this morning when he didn't come out to the stables." Dr. Lane was already reaching for his medical bag. "Harriet, fetch my surgical kit. Quickly now." "I'm coming with you," she said firmly, already turning to change her clothes. Her father didn't argue. He'd long since learned the futility of opposing his daughter's determined spirit. Within minutes, they were in the doctor's buggy, racing toward Zach's small ranch outside town. The scene that greeted them was grim. Zach lay on his bed in the modest ranch house, his face bruised and swollen almost beyond recognition. His left arm was clearly broken, and from the way he winced with each labored breath, Harriet suspected broken ribs as well. "Zachary," she whispered, moving to his side while her father examined him. His right eye, the only one not swollen shut, opened slightly. Recognition flickered there, followed by something that might have been shame. "You shouldn't see me like this," he managed. "Hush now," she soothed, taking his uninjured hand. "Save your strength." Dr. Lane worked methodically, cleaning wounds, setting the broken arm, and binding the ribs. Harriet assisted as she had done countless times before, but never with such a personal stake in the outcome. Every wince from Zach, every suppressed groan of pain felt like a physical blow. "Did you see who did this?" she asked Miguel, the ranch hand who hovered anxiously in the doorway. The young Mexican man shook his head. "He was already like this when I found him, señorita, but—" He hesitated, glancing toward the door as if afraid of being overheard. "What is it, Miguel?" she pressed. "Last night, before he went to town, Mr. Irwin told me that if anything happened to him, I should look in the strong box under his bed. There's a letter there for the territorial governor about the mine and the water rights." Miguel's voice dropped to a whisper. "He said Sheriff Dawson had threatened him after he defended you." Harriet felt cold anger replace her fear. This was no random attack by drunks or bandits. This was a message one meant for both Zach and her. "Father," she said as Dr. Lane finished bandaging Zach's ribs, "will he recover?" The old doctor sighed heavily. "The arm will heal given time, the ribs too, but that blow to his head concerns me. We'll need to watch him closely for the next few days." "Then I'll stay," Harriet declared, her tone brooking no argument. Her father gave her a long look. "Harriet, your reputation, hang my reputation," she cut him off. "This man is injured because he stood up for me. I won't leave him." Dr. Lane seemed about to protest further, then simply nodded. He knew his daughter well enough to recognize when her mind was made up. "I'll bring you some things from home and check on him again this evening." After her father left, Harriet set about making the sick room more comfortable. She opened windows to let in fresh air, prepared broth for when Zach might be able to take nourishment, and gently bathed his face with cool water to ease the swelling. As she worked, she spoke to him softly, unsure if he could hear through his pain-induced haze. "You shouldn't have gotten involved, you know. My fight with Whitcomb and the sheriff wasn't your battle." To her surprise, his good eye opened slightly. "Some battles need fighting," he whispered. She leaned closer. "Save your strength, Zach. You need to heal." "The letter," he persisted. "In the box. Need to. Send it." "Miguel told me," she assured him. "But right now you're my only concern." His hand sought hers weakly. "Harriet, be careful. They won't stop." "Neither will I," she promised, squeezing his fingers gently. "Now rest." Over the next several days, Harriet rarely left Zach's side. She tended his wounds, coaxed him to eat, and read to him from books she found on his small shelf, mostly history, and a few dog-eared volumes of poetry that surprised her. At night, she slept on a pallet beside his bed, waking at his slightest sound of discomfort. Miguel kept the small ranch running, while Dr. Lane visited daily to check on his patient's progress. The town buzzed with gossip about Harriet Lane's scandalous nursing vigil, but she ignored it all. Let them talk. She had more important concerns than Genoa's small-minded propriety. On the 5th day, Zach was strong enough to sit up in bed for short periods. The swelling in his face had subsided enough to reveal the man beneath the bruises still handsome despite the injuries, with a quiet strength that impressed her more with each passing day. "You should go home," he told her that evening as she brought him a bowl of stew. "You've done more than enough. I can manage now." Harriet set the tray on his lap. "Are you trying to get rid of me, Mr. Irwin?" she asked lightly, though the thought stung more than she expected. "Never," he replied with unexpected intensity. "But I can't let you sacrifice your good name for me. People talk, Harriet." She shrugged, trying to appear unconcerned. "People always talk, especially about women who don't conform to their narrow idea of what's proper." Zach studied her face. "Is that why you fight so hard about the water rights? Because you won't be confined by their expectations?" "I fight because it's right," she corrected him. "Whitcomb's mine is poisoning the creek and diverting water that farmers have relied on for generations." That he can do this with the law's blessing only proves the law isn't always just. He nodded slowly. I reached the same conclusion after the war, saw too many legal injustices to believe in the infallibility of law. He set down his spoon. That's why I wrote to Governor Bradley. He's a fair man from what I hear, less susceptible to Whitcomb's brand of persuasion than our local officials. Do you really think the governor will intervene? Harriet asked, not daring to hope too much. I don't know, Zach admitted, but we have to try through official channels before. He trailed off. Before what? She pressed. He shook his head slightly. Nothing. Just an old soldier's ramblings. But Harriet sensed there was something he wasn't ready to share. She didn't push, respecting his privacy as he had respected her decision to stay and care for him. That night, as Harriet lay on her pallet in the darkness of Zach's room, listening to his now steady breathing, she found herself wondering about the man she'd come to know these past days. He was unlike anyone she'd met before, thoughtful and principled, with none of the swagger that many Western men affected. In the quiet moments between tending his wounds and bringing him food, they had talked of books and ideas, of the war he'd fought in, and the changes sweeping across the country. She had never felt so understood, so appreciated for her mind rather than merely tolerated as the doctor's headstrong daughter. She was startled from her reverie by Zach's voice. "Harriet, are you awake?" She sat up in the darkness. "Yes, do you need something?" "No, I just—" He paused. "I wanted to thank you, not just for nursing me, but for being someone worth standing up for that day in town." The simple sincerity in his voice touched something deep within her. "I think we both found someone worth standing up for," she replied softly. The silence that followed was filled with unspoken understanding, the beginning of something neither had anticipated, but both now recognized. The next morning brought an unexpected visitor. Harriet was hanging laundry in the yard when the sound of approaching hoofbeats drew her attention. A sleek black stallion came into view, bearing none other than Victor Whitcomb himself, owner of the Silver Crown Mine and the most powerful man in the county. He reined in his horse, regarding her with cold curiosity. "Miss Lane, I heard you'd taken up residence at Irwin's place." The gossips in town weren't exaggerating for once. Harriet lifted her chin, refusing to be shamed. "Mr. Whitcomb, what brings you to call?" He dismounted with the ease of a much younger man. Despite being in his 50s, Whitcomb maintained the trim figure and erect posture of someone used to command. "I came to speak with Irwin, but perhaps it's fortunate I found you as well. Mr. Irwin is recovering from a brutal attack," she said pointedly. "He's not receiving visitors." Whitcomb smiled thinly. "A most unfortunate incident. Genoa has its share of ruffians, I'm afraid." The implication that he had nothing to do with the attack hung in the air, unconvincing. "Nevertheless, I have a business proposition that might interest him and you." "I doubt that very much," Harriet replied, continuing to hang the washing as if the conversation were of no consequence. "Don't be so hasty, Miss Lane," Whitcomb chided. "I understand your concerns about the water usage. Perhaps we've been overzealous in our operations. I'm prepared to discuss a compromise." This got her attention. "What kind of compromise?" "One that benefits everyone," he said smoothly. "The mine will implement new filtering systems to reduce contamination, and will construct a reservoir to ensure farmers have access to water even during our peak operations." Harriet narrowed her eyes. "And what do you want in exchange for this sudden generosity?" "Merely an end to the public agitation. No more speeches in the town square. And I understand Irwin has been gathering evidence for some sort of petition to the governor that would need to cease as well." So he knew about the letter. Harriet wondered if the ranch was being watched even now. "I'll convey your offer to Mr. Irwin," she said noncommittally. Though I think you'll find neither of us responds well to thinly veiled threats. Whitcomb's pleasant facade cracked slightly. This isn't a threat, Miss Lane. It's an opportunity, perhaps the only one you'll get. Irwin was fortunate to survive his encounter with Genoa's criminal element. The next time, he might not be so lucky. He mounted his horse again. And a woman alone in the world without father or husband to protect her might face even worse consequences. Harriet felt a chill at his words but refused to show fear. "Good day, Mr. Whitcomb. I believe you know your way back to town." He tipped his hat with mock courtesy. "Think on what I said, Miss Lane. I'll expect your answer within the week." As the dust from his horse's hooves settled, Harriet rushed inside to find Zach attempting to rise from his bed, his face pale with the effort. "I heard voices," he explained. "Whitcomb?" "Yes," she confirmed, gently pushing him back against the pillows. "He's gone now." "What did he want?" Zach asked, his good eye watching her intently. Harriet related the conversation, watching Zach's expression darken with each word. When she finished, he was silent for a long moment. "He's afraid," Zach finally said. "The governor must be taking our complaints seriously." "Or he wouldn't bother with compromises," Harriet agreed. But his threat was clear enough. Zach reached for her hand. "Harriet, perhaps you should go back to town, stay with your father. If Whitcomb is making threats against you, I'm not running away," she interrupted firmly. "We're closer to solving this than ever before. Besides," she added with a small smile, "you're still not well enough to be left alone." "Stubborn woman," he murmured, but there was admiration in his voice. "You have no idea," she replied with a hint of mischief. Later that evening, as Harriet prepared their simple supper, she heard the sound of a wagon approaching. Wary after Whitcomb's visit, she peered out the window to see her father's buggy pulling up to the house. Dr. Lane wasn't alone. Sheriff Dawson rode alongside the buggy, his expression grim. Harriet's heart sank. She hurried to Zach's room. "The sheriff is here with my father," she warned him. "Stay in bed, I'll handle this." Zach struggled to sit up. "No, we face this together." She wanted to argue but recognized the determination in his eyes. Instead, she helped him into a shirt and supported him as they made their way slowly to the front room. The knock came just as they reached the sofa. Harriet settled Zach there before opening the door. "Father," she greeted Dr. Lane, deliberately ignoring the sheriff. "I wasn't expecting you until tomorrow." "Harriet," the old doctor said, his face lined with worry, "the sheriff has some questions for Mr. Irwin and for you." "By all means," Zach called from the sofa, his voice stronger than Harriet had expected. "Come in, Sheriff. I've been wanting to speak with you about the ruffians who attacked me." Sheriff Dawson entered, his hand resting casually near his holster as always. He surveyed the domestic scene with obvious distaste. "Miss Lane, your father has been quite concerned about your situation here." "My situation is that I'm nursing an injured man back to health," Harriet replied coolly. "As the daughter of a doctor, it's hardly unprecedented." "Nevertheless," Dawson continued, "there have been complaints about your living arrangements. Unchaperoned, in a man's home, it's causing talk that reflects poorly on Genoa." "Is that why you're here, Sheriff?" Zach asked. "To enforce propriety. I thought catching those who nearly beat me to death might be a higher priority." Dawson's jaw tightened. "I'm investigating that matter as well, Irwin, which brings me to my questions. Do you have any enemies who might wish you harm?" "None that I'm aware of," Zach replied evenly. "Unless speaking out against water theft and corruption has become a crime worth punishing." The sheriff's face reddened. "Be careful with your accusations." "It's not an accusation, merely an observation," Zach said. "Curious how my beating occurred the very night after I stood up to you in the town square." "Zachary," Dr. Lane cautioned, Antagonizing the sheriff won't help matters. What would help, Doctor, Harriet interjected, is if the law in this town protected all citizens equally, not just those with money and influence. Sheriff Dawson turned his cold gaze on her. Miss Lane, your father has agreed that it would be best if you returned home with him tonight. This arrangement has gone on long enough. I disagree, she replied firmly. Mr. Irwin still requires care. Harriet, her father pleaded, please be reasonable. Your reputation is already in tatters, according to town gossip, she finished for him. So what difference does another day or week make? I made a commitment to see Mr. Irwin healthy again, and I intend to honor it. The sheriff stepped closer, his hand still near his gun. This isn't a request, Miss Lane. Your behavior constitutes public indecency. Either you leave voluntarily with your father, or I'll arrest you and Irwin too, for that matter. On what charges? Zach demanded, struggling to his feet despite his injuries. Contributing to the delinquency of a respectable woman would do for starters, Dawson snapped. Harriet moved to stand between the sheriff and Zach. I am not delinquent, Sheriff. I am a grown woman making my own choices. If that offends your sensibilities or those of Whitcomb's cronies, that's hardly my concern. Dawson's eyes narrowed. No one mentioned Whitcomb. They didn't have to, Zach said, coming to stand beside Harriet despite the pain evident in his face. His visit earlier made his position quite clear. Dr. Lane looked alarmed. Victor Whitcomb came here. What did he want? To offer a compromise that wasn't one, Harriet explained, keeping her eyes on the sheriff. And to threaten us if we didn't accept. Slander, Dawson muttered. More reason to end this situation now. He reached for Harriet's arm. Come along, Miss Lane, your father's waiting. Before he could touch her, Zach moved with surprising speed for an injured man, placing himself between Harriet and the sheriff. Take your hand off your weapon, Dawson, he said quietly. We both know you're not here on any legitimate law enforcement business. You're Whitcomb's errand boy, nothing more. For a moment, the tension in the room was so thick it seemed to vibrate in the air. Then, unexpectedly, Dr. Lane stepped forward. Sheriff, he said, his elderly voice surprisingly firm, I believe I've made a mistake in accompanying you here. My daughter is right. Mr. Irwin needs continued care and she's providing it. I withdraw any complaint I may have implied. Dawson's face contorted with anger. You old fool. Do you know what Whitcomb will do when he hears about this defiance? Threatening a respected physician now, Sheriff. Zach asked mildly. I wonder what the territorial newspapers would make of that, or the governor. The sheriff looked from face to face, realizing he was now outnumbered. With a curse, he turned toward the door. This isn't over, he warned. Not by a long shot. After he stormed out, the three remaining occupants of the room exhaled collectively. Zach sank back onto the sofa, his burst of strength fading now that the immediate danger had passed. Father, Harriet said, turning to the old doctor with gratitude, thank you for standing with us. Doctor. Lane sighed heavily. I've spent too many years worrying about appearances, Harriet. Perhaps it's time I followed your example and focused on what's right instead. He looked at Zach with newfound respect. You're a brave man, Mr. Irwin. And judging by your willingness to stand up when you can barely walk, I'd say my daughter's care has been effective. She's a remarkable woman, sir, Zach replied, his gaze finding Harriet's. I'm beginning to think I owe those thugs a debt of gratitude for bringing her into my home. Harriet felt her cheeks warm at the undisguised admiration in his voice. Yes, well, you're not fully recovered yet, so don't get ahead of yourself, she said briskly, though a smile played at her lips. Dr. Lane glanced between them, a knowing look crossing his weathered features. I'll return tomorrow with more supplies, he said. And perhaps we should discuss our next steps regarding Whitcomb and the mine. It seems we're all involved now." After her father left, Harriet helped Zach back to his bedroom. "You shouldn't have confronted Dawson like that," she admonished gently. "You could have reopened your wounds." "Some things are worth the risk," he replied, catching her hand as she adjusted his pillows. "Harriet, I need to ask you something." She paused, suddenly aware of how close they were, of the warmth of his fingers around hers. "Yes. When this is over, when I'm healed and the business with Whitcomb is resolved, one way or another, will you still be here?" The vulnerability in his question was so at odds with the strength he'd shown earlier that it caught her off guard. I don't know what you mean," she stammered, though part of her did. "I think you do," he said softly. "These past days, having you here, it's made me realize what I've been missing. Not just companionship, but someone who understands, who fights for what matters." He took a deep breath. "I'm not expressing this well. What I'm trying to say is, I think I'm falling in love with you, Harriet Lane. And I need to know if there's any chance you might someday feel the same." The directness of his declaration left her momentarily speechless. In the silence, doubt crept into his expression. "Forgive me," he said quickly. "That was presumptuous. You've been kind enough to nurse me, and here I am burdening you with unwelcome feelings." "They're not unwelcome," she finally managed, her voice barely above a whisper. "They're unexpected, perhaps, but not unwelcome." She met his gaze squarely. "I don't know what the future holds, Zach. But I do know that something has changed for me too, something important." Relief flooded his face, followed by a joy that transformed his features despite the fading bruises. "That's enough for now," he said. "More than enough." Harriet squeezed his hand before releasing it. "Rest now. We have battles ahead, and you'll need your strength." That night, as she lay on her pallet, sleep eluded her. Zach's words echoed in her mind, along with the realization that her feelings for him had indeed grown into something deeper than friendship or duty. The prospect was both exhilarating and terrifying. She had never imagined herself falling in love, had always prioritized her causes and convictions over romantic entanglements. And yet, in Zachary Irwin, she had found someone who not only respected her principles but shared them. Someone who saw her strength as an asset rather than a flaw to be corrected. The thought warmed her more than any blanket could. The next week brought significant changes. Zach regained enough strength to move around the house unassisted, though his broken arm remained splinted. Harriet continued her nursing duties, but their relationship subtly shifted, more partners now than patient and caregiver. Word arrived via Dr. Lane that Governor Bradley had indeed received Zach's letter and was sending an investigator to look into the claims against Whitcomb's mine. The news brought hope but also increased the tension. If Whitcomb had been dangerous before, he would be doubly so now. True to this prediction, their troubles multiplied. Miguel reported that men had been seen watching the ranch from the nearby hills. One morning, they awoke to find two of Zach's horses missing, stolen in the night. When they ventured into town for supplies, shopkeepers suddenly found their inventories depleted of items Harriet requested. "They're trying to isolate us," Zach observed as they returned to the ranch with half the supplies they'd needed. "Turn the town against us before the governor's man arrives." "It won't work," Harriet insisted, though worry gnawed at her. "People here have suffered from Whitcomb's greed too. When they see an official investigation is happening, they'll speak up." "I hope you're right," Zach said, though his tone suggested doubt. That evening, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset paint the distant mountains in shades of gold and crimson, Zach suddenly tensed. "Riders coming," he said, rising to his feet. "Multiple horses moving fast." Harriet stood as well, shading her eyes against the dying sunlight. A cloud of dust marked the approach of several horsemen, still too distant to identify. "Get inside," Zach ordered, reaching for the rifle he kept by the door. "Lock yourself in my room." "I will not," she retorted. "If there's trouble, we face it together." Before he could argue further, the riders came into clear view, 4 men with Sheriff Dawson at their head. "Trouble it is," Zach muttered, keeping the rifle ready but not raised. "Stay behind me, at least." Harriet ignored this, coming to stand beside him as the riders pulled up in front of the house. Besides Dawson, she recognized 2 of Whitcomb's mine supervisors and, to her shock, Joseph Bell, the town banker and supposed family friend. "Evening, Irwin," Dawson called, not bothering to dismount. "Miss Lane." His nod to her held thinly disguised contempt. "What brings you out here, Sheriff?" Zach asked calmly, though Harriet could sense the tension in his body. "Official business," Dawson replied. "Mr. Bell here has brought to my attention that there are irregularities with your property deed." Zach's expression didn't change, but Harriet felt him stiffen slightly. "Is that so?" "Strange, considering I've paid my taxes promptly for 5 years without issue." Bell cleared his throat nervously. "It appears the original sale was improperly recorded. The previous owner had an outstanding loan against the property that was never satisfied." "Convenient timing for such a discovery," Harriet observed dryly. Bell avoided her eyes. "The bank regrets the oversight, of course." "I'm sure it does," Zach said. "And I suppose there's an immediate payment required to clear this imaginary debt." $500, Bell confirmed. "Due within 3 days, or the property reverts to the bank for resale." It was an impossible sum, and they all knew it. Even if Zach had that kind of money, the banks in nearby towns wouldn't have time to transfer funds before the deadline. "This is blatant theft," Harriet exclaimed, unable to contain her outrage. "You should be ashamed, Mr. Bell. My father trusted you." The banker had the grace to look uncomfortable, but Dawson merely smiled coldly. "The law is the law, Miss Lane. If Irwin can't meet his obligations, he'll need to vacate the premises." He leaned forward in his saddle. "Of course, there might be a way to resolve this amicably. If you both were to sign a statement retracting the complaints against Mr. Whitcomb's mining operation, and if Miss Lane were to return to town where she belongs, perhaps the bank could extend the payment deadline indefinitely." "So there it is," Zach said quietly. "Whitcomb's real offer." He raised the rifle slightly, not aiming it but ensuring it was visible. "I think you should leave now, Sheriff. We've both had enough of your official business for one day." Dawson's hand moved to his holster. "Threatening an officer of the law, Irwin, that's a hanging offense." "Merely asking unwelcome visitors to depart," Zach corrected. "And I haven't pointed this rifle at anyone yet." The standoff stretched for several tense seconds before one of the mine supervisors broke the silence. "Come on, Dawson. We delivered the message. Let's go." The sheriff's expression darkened, but he finally nodded. 3 days, Irwin. Then this place belongs to someone who appreciates how things work in Genoa." With that, he wheeled his horse around and rode off, the others following. When they were gone, Harriet released a shaky breath. "They're getting desperate." "Yes," Zach agreed grimly, "which makes them more dangerous." He set the rifle down and ran his hand through his hair. "Harriet, I think you should go back to town, stay with your father. Things are escalating, and I can't bear the thought of you being caught in the middle if this turns violent." "I'm already in the middle," she reminded him. "Have been since I first spoke out against Whitcomb. Going back to town won't change that. It will only separate us, which is exactly what they want." He looked at her with a mixture of admiration and frustration. "You're the most stubborn, courageous woman I've ever known, but that doesn't make me worry any less." She stepped closer, placing her hand on his chest. We're stronger together, Zach. These past weeks have proven that. He covered her hand with his own. Together then, he conceded, but we need a plan. We have 3 days before they try to take the ranch, and there's no way I can raise $500 in that time. Perhaps we don't need to, Harriet said thoughtfully. The governor's investigator is due any day now, if we can stall them until he arrives. That's a big risk, Zach pointed out. If he's delayed, or if Whitcomb's men decide not to wait for the legal eviction. Then we'll face that too, she said with more confidence than she felt. In the meantime, let's send Miguel to Carson City with a message for the governor. He can travel faster alone and he knows the back trails. Zach nodded slowly. It's worth a try. I'll speak to him tonight. As darkness fell, they moved inside, bolting the door against the night and whatever it might bring. Sitting at Zach's small kitchen table, they drafted a message explaining the new threats and requesting urgent intervention from the territorial authorities. Miguel departed before dawn, carrying their hopes with him toward the territorial capital. The following 2 days passed in a state of heightened vigilance. Zach insisted on teaching Harriet how to handle his spare revolver, despite her initial reluctance. "I've never believed in violence," she protested as he showed her how to load the weapon. "Neither have I," he replied seriously. "Not since I saw enough of it during the war, but I believe in protecting what matters." His eyes met hers. "And you matter, Harriet, more than I can say." The simple declaration touched her deeply. In response, she raised herself on tiptoes and pressed her lips to his, their first kiss, born of danger and deepening feeling. When they parted, Zach's eyes were filled with a mixture of surprise and longing. "I should have done that weeks ago," she murmured. "Better late than never," he replied with a smile that transformed his face. On the 3rd day, the bank's deadline, they awoke to an ominous silence. No birds sang in the trees surrounding the ranch house. Even the usual distant sounds of cattle on neighboring spreads seemed absent. "Something's wrong," Zach said, peering out the window cautiously. "It's too quiet." Harriet joined him at the window. "Could Miguel have returned already?" Zach shook his head. "The round trip to Carson City takes at least 3 days, even pushing hard. He can't possibly be back yet." As if in answer to their speculation, a single rider appeared on the road leading to the ranch, not Miguel, but a man neither of them recognized. He rode slowly, clearly not attempting to conceal his approach. "Stay inside," Zach instructed, taking up his rifle. "I'll see what he wants." "We agreed to face things together," Harriet reminded him, picking up the revolver he'd given her. "I'm coming with you." They stepped onto the porch as the rider reached the yard. He was a middle-aged man with a neat beard, dressed more like a banker than a cowhand. Nothing about him suggested violence, yet Zach kept his rifle ready. "Mr. Irwin, I presume?" the stranger called, reining in his horse at a respectful distance. "And Miss Lane, who's asking?" Zach responded warily. The man reached slowly into his coat, extracting a folded document. "Marcus Reeves, Special Investigator for Governor Bradley. I believe you've been expecting me." Relief flooded through Harriet. "Mr. Reeves, thank God you've come. We sent a messenger to Carson City just 2 days ago." "Yes, I encountered your man on the road," Reeves confirmed, dismounting. "His message prompted me to expedite my journey. It seems the situation here is more volatile than the governor initially understood." "You have no idea," Zach said, lowering his rifle slightly but not completely. "The bank is attempting to seize my property today on false pretenses." "Whitcomb's doing?" Reeves nodded grimly. "So I gathered from your messenger. I've brought provisional orders from the governor freezing any property transfers in the area pending my investigation." He held out the document. "This should halt any immediate action against your ranch." Harriet stepped forward to take the paper, scanning it quickly. "This is wonderful news, Mr. Reeves, but I fear Sheriff Dawson may not honor the governor's orders. He's deeply in Whitcomb's pocket." "I anticipated as much," Reeves replied. "Which is why I've also brought—" The crack of a rifle shot cut off his words. Reeves jerked, a look of surprise crossing his face as a bloom of red appeared on his chest. As he crumpled to the ground, more shots rang out from the tree line at the edge of the property. "Inside!" Zach shouted, grabbing Harriet's arm and pulling her back toward the door as bullets splintered the wood around them. They tumbled inside, Zach kicking the door shut behind them. "My God," Harriet gasped, staring at the closed door. "They shot him. They just shot a government official in cold blood." "Get away from the windows," Zach ordered, crawling to peek through a gap in the curtains. "They're coming, at least 6 men. Dawson's with them and Whitcomb too." His voice was tight with controlled fear. "Harriet, listen to me. There's a cellar trapdoor in the pantry. Get down there and hide." "I won't leave you to face them alone," she insisted, checking that her revolver was loaded as he had taught her. "This isn't a discussion," he snapped, more harshly than he'd ever spoken to her. "They're here to kill us, Harriet. The only way out of this is if one of us survives to tell the governor what happened." She stared at him, understanding dawning horribly. "You're planning to sacrifice yourself." "I'm planning to buy you time," he corrected, his expression softening as he glanced back at her. "Harriet, please. If you've ever felt anything for me, do this one thing. Hide, survive, make sure Whitcomb pays for what he's done." Tears sprang to her eyes. "Don't ask me to leave you." "I'm asking you to live," he replied quietly, "for both of us." Another volley of shots hit the house, shattering a window and sending glass flying across the room. The decision was made for her. "I love you," she said fiercely. "Remember that. Whatever happens, I love you, Zachary Irwin." He crossed the room in 2 strides, pulling her into a desperate embrace. "And I love you, Harriet Lane. Now go." Heartbreaking, she retreated to the pantry and lifted the trapdoor to the small cellar below. As she lowered herself down, she heard Zach moving furniture to create barricades against the doors and windows. The trapdoor closed above her, leaving her in darkness. From her hiding place, she could hear muffled shouting, then more gunfire, Zach returning fire now, the sound of his rifle distinct from the attacker's weapons. A crash suggested they were breaking down the door. More shots. A cry of pain, not Zach's voice, she was certain. Then a terrible silence. "Where's the woman?" Sheriff Dawson's voice closer now, inside the house. "Not here," Zach replied, his voice strained but defiant. "She left for town this morning, probably reached her father's house by now." "You're lying." Another voice, Whitcomb's, she thought. "Search the house, find her." Harriet held her breath as footsteps moved overhead, praying the trapdoor was well hidden enough to escape notice. Her hand tightened around the revolver. If they found her, she would not go quietly. "Nothing, sir," a voice eventually reported. "She's not here." "No matter," Whitcomb said dismissively. "We'll deal with her next. As for you, Irwin, you've been a thorn in my side long enough. Killing a government investigator is hanging a fence, Whitcomb," Zach said, still defiant despite what must be a desperate situation. "When the governor learns what you've done, the governor will learn that dangerous outlaws killed his investigator," Whitcomb interrupted. "The same outlaws who unfortunately shot you when you tried to defend your property. A tragic story, but a common one in these lawless territories." Harriet bit her lip until she tasted blood, fighting the urge to burst from her hiding place and confront them. Zach had sacrificed himself to give her a chance. She couldn't waste it now, no matter how her heart screamed for action. "You won't get away with this," Zach insisted. "People know the truth. People believe what those in power tell them to believe," Whitcomb replied coldly. "A lesson you never learned, unfortunately. Sheriff, I believe your jurisdiction extends to executions when necessary." "It does indeed, Mr. Whitcomb," Dawson agreed with obvious relish. Harriet squeezed her eyes shut, unable to bear what was coming. But the expected gunshot never came. Instead, a new commotion erupted above shouting, the sound of horses, more gunfire, but from outside the house now. "What the hell?" Dawson exclaimed. "Who are they?" "It's the cavalry, you murdering bastards." A new voice, one Harriet didn't recognize. "Drop your weapons or we start shooting to kill." The next few minutes were chaos, running footsteps, shouts of surrender, the thud of bodies hitting the floor. Then, finally, a voice calling out, "Irwin. You still alive in there?" "I'm here," Zach replied, his voice weak but gloriously, wonderfully alive. "In the front room." Harriet couldn't wait any longer. She pushed open the trapdoor and scrambled out of the cellar, racing through the house to find Zach slumped against the overturned dining table, blood staining his shirt but his eyes open and alert. "Zach," she cried, falling to her knees beside him. He looked up at her with a mixture of relief and exasperation. "I told you to stay hidden," he admonished weakly. "I never was very good at following orders," she replied, tears streaming down her face as she pressed her hands against his wound to stem the bleeding. "Who are they? What happened?" Before he could answer, the front door opened to admit several men in territorial marshal uniforms, led by a tall, gray-haired man with a star on his chest. "U.S. Marshal James Porter," he introduced himself. "Governor Bradley sent us to escort Mr. Reeves and provide additional authority if needed. Looks like we arrived just in time." "Reeves?" Harriet asked. "Is he?" "Dead, I'm afraid," Porter confirmed grimly. "Shot in the back by one of Whitcomb's men. We saw it happen as we were approaching. Got here as fast as we could." "Whitcomb and Dawson?" Zach asked, "in custody along with 4 of their men. 2 more are dead. They chose to fight rather than surrender." Porter knelt beside them, examining Zach's wound. "You need a doctor, son." "My father is the town physician," Harriet said quickly. "If you could send someone, already done," Porter assured her. "One of my men rode for town as soon as we secured the area." As if on cue, the sound of an approaching buggy reached them. Moments later, Dr. Lane burst through the door, medical bag in hand. "Harriet, thank God you're safe," he exclaimed, rushing to embrace his daughter before turning his attention to Zach. "Let me see that wound, young man." While her father worked to extract the bullet from Zach's shoulder, Marshal Porter explained what had happened. Governor Bradley, concerned by the tone of Zach's original letter, had dispatched not only an investigator, but also a contingent of federal marshals to ensure justice was served. They had been delayed by weather in the mountains, but had pushed through to arrive just as Whitcomb's attack began. "The governor takes allegations of corruption very seriously," Porter concluded, "especially when they involve interference with water rights that affect multiple communities. Whitcomb and his cronies will face federal charges: murder, attempted murder, corruption, assault on a government official. They won't see daylight for decades, if ever." Harriet held Zach's hand as her father finished bandaging his shoulder. "It seems our troubles are over," she said softly. "Some of them," Zach agreed, wincing as he shifted position, "though I suspect I'll be in for a painful recovery. Again." "Fortunately, you have an excellent nurse," Dr. Lane remarked with a knowing smile. "Though perhaps this time, propriety might suggest a more formal arrangement for her continued care." Zach met Harriet's eyes, a question in his gaze. "What do you think, Miss Lane? Would you consider making your nursing duties more permanent, along with other duties that might come with being a rancher's wife?" Despite the chaos around them, despite the blood and pain and fear of the day, Harriet felt her heart soar. "Mr. Irwin, I believe that's the most practical proposal I've ever received," she teased, though her eyes shone with tears of joy. "And yes, I would consider it. Most definitely yes." Dr. Lane cleared his throat, feigning disapproval though his eyes twinkled. "I suppose as her father I should insist on a proper courtship period." "With all due respect, sir," Zach interrupted, his gaze never leaving Harriet's, "I believe we're well past the courtship stage. Your daughter has seen me at my worst and somehow loves me anyway. I'd say that's a stronger foundation than most marriages begin with." The old doctor laughed. "You make a fair point. Very well, you have my blessing. Though I expect a proper wedding in the church, mind you. The town gossips have had enough to chew on already." 1 month later, the church in Genoa was filled to capacity as Zachary Irwin, still moving carefully but healing well, waited at the altar for his bride. To the surprise of many, the pews were filled not only with the usual town residents, but also with farmers and ranchers from throughout the region, people who had suffered under Whitcomb's regime, and now came to celebrate the union of two people who had helped bring it down. Governor Bradley himself attended, using the occasion to announce new territorial regulations on mining operations and water usage regulations that would protect the rights of all citizens, not just the wealthy and powerful. The Lane-Irwin Act, he called it, to the delight of the bride and groom. When Harriet walked down the aisle on her father's arm, her simple white dress glowing in the autumn sunlight that streamed through the church windows, Zach felt his breath catch. This remarkable woman, brave, principled, stubborn as the day was long, had chosen to share her life with him. It seemed a miracle greater than their survival of Whitcomb's attacks. "Dearly beloved," the minister began, his voice carrying to every corner of the packed church. As they exchanged their vows, Harriet's clear "I do" rang with the same conviction she had shown that day in the town square, standing up for what she believed in. Zach's response was quieter but no less certain, the voice of a man who had found his purpose and his heart's home. The kiss that sealed their union brought cheers from the assembled guests, none louder than those from Marshal Porter and his men, who had remained in town to testify at the preliminary hearings against Whitcomb and his accomplices. At the reception that followed, Dr. Lane raised a toast to the newlyweds. "To my daughter and new son-in-law, may your partnership in life be as successful as your partnership in justice. And," he added with a mischievous twinkle, "may you give me grandchildren soon to spoil in my old age." Harriet blushed, but couldn't help smiling at the thought. A family with Zach children who would grow up knowing their parents had stood for something important, had made a difference in their corner of the world. It was a legacy worth building. Later, as they danced beneath lanterns strung in the town square, the same spot where their story had begun that fateful day, Zach pulled Harriet close. "Happy, Mrs. Irwin," he murmured in her ear. "Deliriously so, Mr. Irwin," she replied, resting her head against his good shoulder. "Though I hope you realize I intend to continue speaking out when necessary," he laughed, the sound warm and genuine. "I would expect nothing less. In fact, I'm counting on it. The West needs strong voices like yours to shape it into something better than it is." "Our voices," she corrected him. "Together." "Together," he agreed, sealing the promise with a kiss as the stars appeared overhead, witnesses to a love born in defiance and nurtured through danger, a love that, like the land they called home, would endure and flourish in the years to come. 2 years later, Harriet sat on the front porch of their expanded ranch house, watching Zach teaching their 1-year-old son, Edward, named for her father, to take his first tentative steps across the yard. The little boy's face was scrunched in concentration, his small hands gripping his father's fingers as he wobbled forward. "That's it, Eddie," Zach encouraged, his face alight with pride. "One foot in front of the other, just like that." Harriet's hand rested on her growing belly, where their second child kicked vigorously. Another fighter, she thought with a smile. Like father, like mother, like son. The ranch had prospered under their joint care. With the new water regulations in place, the creek flowed clear and strong again, nourishing their expanded herds and the vegetable gardens Harriet had insisted on planting. They had built additional rooms onto the house, anticipating the growth of their family, and had hired several hands to help with the increasing workload. More importantly, they had become leaders in the community. Zach now served on the Territorial Water Commission, while Harriet had started the region's first newspaper, a small but influential publication dedicated to honest reporting and advocacy for the common good. Together, they were helping to shape a West that valued justice and equal opportunity over the rule of the strongest or wealthiest. "I think he's got it," Zach called to her as little Eddie took his first independent step, then another, his chubby face breaking into a delighted grin before he plopped down on his bottom. Harriet clapped her hands. "Wonderful. Soon he'll be running everywhere and we'll never keep up." "Like his mother," Zach teased, scooping up their son and bringing him to the porch. "Always a step ahead of everyone else." "Someone has to lead the way," she replied with a smile, accepting Eddie onto her lap. The little boy immediately began patting her rounded belly, fascinated by the movement within. "We received a letter from Governor Bradley today," Zach said, settling into the chair beside her. "The new educational initiative we proposed has been approved. Construction on the regional school will begin next spring." Harriet's eyes lit up. "That's wonderful news. Every child deserves the chance to learn regardless of their parents' means." She looked down at her son. "Including girls, especially girls." Zach took her hand, his expression turning thoughtful. "Do you ever wonder how differently things might have turned out if I hadn't spoken up that day in town, or if the marshals hadn't arrived when they did?" "I try not to dwell on what-ifs," she replied. "But I do thank Providence every day that you were brave enough to stand beside me when no one else would." She squeezed his hand. "You said I'd have to arrest you too, and somehow that changed everything." "Best decision I ever made," he said simply. "Though I didn't realize at the time I was signing up for a lifetime of standing beside the most strong-willed woman in the territory." "Complaints, Mr. Irwin?" she asked, arching an eyebrow. He leaned over to kiss her, then ruffled their son's hair. "Not a single one, Mrs. Irwin. Not a single one." As the sun set over the mountains, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson, they sat together on their porch, a family forged in courage and love, building a life and a legacy that would endure long after the Wild West had faded into history.